Hello, everyone. I'm excited to introduce my friend, Elias. Elias, tell me more about yourself. So, your legal name is Caleb, but you go by Elias. What's that about?
Well, yeah, so I was born Caleb. My parents gave me that name. And when I converted to the Orthodox faith, um, I I chose the prophet Elijah, the saint. So when I was baptized, that was the name I took. Now, ideally, in hindsight, Caleb is a fine Christian name, and no reason not to keep that. But uh, but anyway, so I had a Elias, which is the Greek form of it. And when I joined a monastery soon after that, after my baptism, the monks were confused about my name because Caleb wasn't a very popular name in Greece, and so they just called me Hey you. And then eventually, when they found out I was baptized with the name Elias, he goes, "Well, that's the name you got to go by." So for the time I was there, for about 5 years or so, it was that was the name I went by, and hearing that all the time and using that name all the time, I just stuck. So I keep to that name, although legally, my name is Caleb.
Okay. Yeah, so I've been doing my doctorate at UNT, and I met a guy there who's the harpsichord professor, who I think you also had as your harpsichord professor, right? Brad
Yes.
Benight.
Yeah, Brad Knight.
And so I was asking him, I said, "Do you know this guy, Elias?" He said, "Elias? I don't know any Elias. Elias Rehmet?" And then I had to remember, no, it's Caleb.
Yeah.
He's like, "Oh yeah, well, what happened to him?" I said, "Well, he basically became a monk for 5 years, and then didn't, and then went to seminary, and now he's in Charleston."
Yeah.
So, why don't you say a little bit about that? You were at a Elder Ephraim Monastery in Texas, right?
Hmm. Yes, I was. Yep.
And people may not know who Elder Ephraim is, especially if they're not Orthodox. So, can you say anything about Elder Ephraim and all that he did?
Sure. Well, I'll give you the quick and dirty version of it. Um, so Elder Ephraim is a monk from Greece, from Mount Athos. Uh, he became a monk at a very young age, uh, suffered through the Nazi occupation, and because of that, he is short in stature, as most Greek men of his time are, because of the food shortage. So a very small guy, but a very holy man. And he was under the eldership, if you will, of St. Joseph the Hesychast, which was uh, hardcore in asceticism.
How so?
Oh, just the asceticism, a lot of prayer, a lot of prostrations, a lot of fasting to their ability, a lot of hard labor.
So, what's a lot of prostrations?
Prostrations is the physical form of prayer where you go on your hands and knees to the ground. It's like a bow in a sense, but done rather.
Right, but I know all Orthodox do some prostrations, right? So, if you're saying a lot of prostrations,
Oh,
how
I
many
see what you're saying.
prostrations is a lot of prostrations? But St. Joseph
Several,
the Hesychast
at least several hundred. Um,
a day?
yeah, could be more, but yeah, for us it was just 50. Although I think technically we're supposed to do 150, but since we were working so much, hard labor, to keep up that kind of rule, that prayer rule, was difficult. But yeah, so Elder from he that was more or less his life at the time. And then when his elder died, passed away in 1959, the 60s, him and some of his other fellow brothers in the Synodia, the Brotherhood, uh, split from each other, and they all formed their own brotherhoods. And in a sense, was the majority of the replenishing of Mount Athos during the 60s and 70s. It was a big, like,
Okay, so he was pivotal in bringing Mount Athos back himself.
in part, yeah. There was others, but he was a big one. Yeah. I mean, his other one's Elder Haralambos, and then Elder Joseph the Cypriot, that's what they call him. And
Okay.
then not directly affiliated with the Brotherhood was Elder Emilianos, was also a big contemporary elder at the time to help replenish the monasteries. And then another one at a smaller capacity would be why am I forgetting his name? Oh, Elder Ephraim of Katanakia. Of course, it's another Elder Ephraim. And
Okay. And how many? And then he came to the United States, right?
yeah, so this, so the general story of it is Elder Ephraim has had a lot of health problems, and he inherited a lot of spiritual children from St. Joseph the Hesychast from across the world, which includes Canada and the United States. But in Canada, there is a big diaspora of Greeks there, huge. And when they heard that he needed certain surgeries done and medical care in that sense, they offered to pay it and go over to Canada and have those surgeries done. So he did, and it wasn't just a one-time thing; it was gradual. Like he'd go back and forth, and there he would tend to his spiritual children as a father confessor and as a spiritual father. And eventually, this is a very short version. He came across a family with some daughters, and they had a desire to be nuns. But there wasn't, at that time at least, a monastery that was adequate or in existence at all on that side of the hemisphere. So it spoke to Elder Ephraim that maybe it's his mission to start some monasteries in the States and in Canada. So that's really kind of what was the impetus for him to gradually, more frequently come to Canada and the United States. Was for that reason, not only for surgeries and to tend to his spiritual children, but then also to see if a monastery could get started. And if I recall correctly, again, very short version, a lot of details. I think the first monastery that he founded successfully was in Pennsylvania, 1981, I think it is. It's a convent monastery for nuns. That was really the first of the monasteries that he started up. And yeah.
And then he created like a lot of them, right? When they're like
Yeah, and then
17
it was
or
gradual. Again, not my understanding is that it wasn't a clear plan of like, oh, we're going to do like 10 and then we're done. It's just, I think Elder Ephraim, my impression is that he kept it open, and he would work with a lot of the community there. If there was a group of parishioners, of Orthodox faithful, that really wanted a monastery in their area and was feasible and viable, and it was doable, then that's where he would pray and look into starting a monastery in that area. So in the end, the first one being in 1981, and then the last one he officially founded was 2004, which was another convent monastery for nuns. And so I think it was a total of 17 or so. Yeah.
and he's a little controversial, right? Isn't there controversy around Elder Ephraim?
Well, as with anything, there is controversy with everyone. Um, but yes, there is controversy with Elder Ephraim. And there's always two sides to a story. Just to keep it simple in a sense, because you can get really into a big rabbit hole with this, that Elder Ephraim had certain beliefs and convictions that he saw were necessary, that perhaps other people and other people in authority didn't agree with or didn't quite see eye to eye with him.
Like what?
Well, off the top of my head, I can't recall at this very moment, but little pietistic things, or maybe how to prepare for communion would be one. Was an issue, as well as penances, or in
He was
confession.
very strict on that, right?
He can be very strict, yeah. But at the same time, very loving.
So, like in preparation for communion, how would he be different than like your?
Well, we're done.
Like Protestants, they're just like, oh, there's communion this Sunday. I guess I'll take communion.
Right.
And then, 100 years ago, Catholics would say like, oh, well, I guess I can't eat before communion, like no breakfast. And then,
Right.
whereas the Orthodox still do the whole, oh, you're not supposed to eat from midnight the night before, but I guess if you're a little more devout, it's from what, Vespers the night before?
Well, no, it's not quite like that. So I guess there's different levels of fasting, you could say. But with Elder Ephraim, and this is just my personal knowledge of what we did in the monastery I joined in, was, as a monastic, you don't eat meat, period, unless you're like really sick. And that's something that's required to keep you alive and, etc. So the fasting for communion was a little bit stricter because we would have to fast from dairy, so any dairy products or animal products like eggs, for example, and then and fish as well. So fish we could have, but anything like that, fish or dairy, the day before, we had to fast from that entirely in order to commune the next day.
So you'd eat vegan the day before communion in order to take communion.
Right. Yeah. Essentially vegan. Yeah. So just to put that in context, though, that's not the typical case, at least in the States, as much. For most churches, Orthodox churches in the States, just your day-to-day parishioners, the fasting is no food or liquids before midnight if you're communing the next day.
You mean after midnight?
Right, after midnight. And then no relations if you're married, and the day before, and
Totally the day before, or just after midnight?
Well,
or is that
this
you
is a
ask your
thing.
priest and it's not a ubiquitous rule?
Yeah, it's kind of from priest to priest, but the general rule that I've heard is after Vespers time. So if you're to have Vespers, so is the general. But again, it varies from couple to couple and father confessor / spiritual father. Just depends.
So the afternoon delight on Saturday is okay, just not post Vespers.
I guess you could say that. Yeah, depends. But yeah, so that's kind of the general rule. But obviously with monastics, you're not married, practice celibacy, and then you have a stricter diet as well.
Right. So it's basically vegan most of the year, right? I mean, and for the monastics, right? Right. So for a regular Orthodox, they fast Wednesday, Friday, and then all of Lent and all the other fasts like Apostles' Fast or Mission Fast. But for the monks, they add to that Mondays, correct? So then it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then the fasting for all of those seasons is stricter than everyone else?
Again, and that it depends. It depends. But in our monastery, if we wanted, how did this work? Yeah, we would fast Mondays. Yeah, but again, it's because we were going to commune the next day. That's all. It's just a fasting rule that way.
But you communed on Tuesdays.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I recall correctly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then Saturdays is tricky because Saturdays are not typically a fasting day by themselves, unless it's like, in a major fasting period. But in order to commune Sunday, if you wanted to, you would have to fast the day before. So typically, I think most Saturdays for us, with some exceptions, were fasting simply because, wanted to commune on a Sunday, which was the next day.
Did most monks commune most Tuesdays and Sundays? Because I guess if you did, then you would be fasting
Sundays,
all day Monday, Tuesday till after communion, then Wednesday, then Friday, and then Saturday.
right.
So
So yeah,
even
Sundays,
during Eastertide?
yeah, well, that's exceptional. But yeah, so most of us would commune Sundays and major feast days, wherever that landed for the most part. Um, Thursdays, and then throughout the week, it just kind of depended, I guess. Sometimes, we had to have coffee or a drink of water beforehand. So that's what we did instead of fasting to commune. And the daily liturgies in the monastery I was at, go by really fast. They're an hour in length, roughly.
Oh,
Maybe,
that's it.
yeah, maybe even a little bit less sometimes. And, in Greek, and it was all in Greek. So the Greeks go a little bit faster. And again, this is just some of the stuff I'm saying is just pertaining only to the monastery I was at. Just because it's an Elder Ephraim Monastery, the one that he started, doesn't mean that all the other ones follow exactly this mode of rule. It just depended on the strength and availability of the sisterhood or brotherhood of the respective monasteries. So I'm
And
sure
which
the rules,
monastery was that again?
the one I was part of, uh, Holy Archangels Greek Orthodox Monastery in Texas.
Okay, and you were a novice, right? So you never took the official vow,
Yeah, no,
and
no
you're sort of
tonsure.
discerning the call. And
Yeah,
how did you end up there to begin with? And why there versus, somewhere that's not as strict? I'd love to get into a little bit more of the stuff you told me before about how crazy strict it was and the crazy asceticism, but you know,
well,
why there and not somewhere else? Because didn't you get down to like 130 pounds?
well, yeah, but that wasn't because I was being ascetical or practicing, fasting deliberately in that way. I just got sick. That's that's why that happened.
But didn't you get sick because of the asceticism?
Maybe, maybe.
That sounds pretty ascetical to me, Elias.
Yeah, I never really thought of it like that, but yeah, I mean, you just live the life. I mean, the life of monasticism is a simple life. It's a simple life, and it's a beautiful life in a lot of ways. But it's also hard in some other ways. Depending, especially in our culture. If you're coming from the United States, in a sense, I think. Um, but yeah,
But so
uh,
why there and not somewhere else?
right. Well, in a word, proximity. It was the closest monastery, male monastery that I could have been a part of potentially. And because of the proximity, you just go when you want to get away for a weekend, when you're visiting. And so it was really the first monastery I was exposed to in that sense. And my priest, my parish priest, he would go there 4 times a year just to have a little sabbatical with his family. So that was really the connection. So when I expressed an interest in monasticism at that time, when I was a young catechumen, not even baptized yet, he strongly suggested I would at least go visit that monastery because it's close, and he knew all the monks, and he could put in a good word for me, and I could stay there for a week or so initially.
And how old were you when you converted?
23? No, almost 23.
23.
Almost 23. I was
23.
22. Yeah, about to be 23.
Okay. And when did you go to the monastery?
A year and a half later.
Okay. Wow, that's pretty quick.
Yeah, I was already visiting other monasteries before then, or trying to, and I think only successfully visited another male monastery. But the reason why is I was always interested in this, excuse me, and in college, I was having a little bit of a crisis of identity in a sense. Like, what am I doing? And I was doing music, and I had prospects of pursuing a master's, continuing my education in music and experience in music. And none of it seemed appealing after a while, and I lost kind of my way in a way. So I was like, well, maybe I just need to work on myself a little bit and learn like what it is to be an Orthodox Christian before I go off to the next crazy thing. Because getting my master's, it would have either been California or Holland, were the two big places I was looking at.
Holland would be cool.
Yeah. But at the time,
probably not a lot of Eastern Orthodoxy in Holland, but
there is some, but yeah, you're right. I mean, and especially the people I was with, wonderful people, but I just think I was having a transition or a shift of what was important for me in life. And for me, then it was, learning to be faithful, living the faith. And I needed to sort of have a clean start in a sense, though I didn't realize that was what I was kind of looking for at the time. But I was very drawn to monasticism, and my bishop, rather our metropolitan of our jurisdiction, the OCA, very kind, and himself was a former abbot of a monastery before he became a bishop, and he was very encouraging for me, like very encouraging to young men, and about monasticism, encouraging them to go visit. So he really kind of gave me a loose obedience, if you will. It wasn't really an obedience, but just kind of encouragement, where he says, well, on your off time, he goes, first, just finish school, get your undergrad. You're going to be thankful that you did. So, and then on your off times, on your breaks, go visit other monasteries. So that's what I attempted to do. Yeah. So that's how that kind of got started. But then...
And then how did those other monasteries stack up?
Well, I only visited other one, like I said, and that was in California. And actually that was Metropolitan Jonah's old monastery. And that one was in my jurisdiction. So the Elder Ephraim Monasteries are Greek monasteries, but this one was OCA. And it was wonderful. It just, the monastery fell apart when I was there. And I was only baptized a couple months in. They had this thing called a summer novice program where, it's like young men visiting for a summer, and they like live the life of a monastic, but without any ties. And you just stay there for a month or two or however long you want or could, do. And yeah, so when I was going in, there's like 16 fathers and a bunch of workers. And then about 2 or 3 months in, there was a big split, and about 9 of them left right then and there. And then just slowly, that monastery started to fall apart.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah. As a young man, just to see that was very difficult.
And was your church OCA? And if people don't know, that's the Orthodox Church of America, which is more the Slavic tradition. It's all English and all American, but the musical aesthetic comes from
the Slavic liturgics, if you will.
And Slavic liturgics versus, Antiochian or Greek, which is what, more Byzantine chant and more...
Well, it's more Byzantine Rite.
Right, Byzantine Rite and what, typically Byzantine chant as well?
Yeah, so the music, yeah, the Byzantine chant, yeah, as opposed to...
So was your church in Texas, was it more Greek or...
No,
OCA?
It was OCA. Yeah, we visited a lot of churches in North Texas, and there's actually quite a few Orthodox churches in North Texas, and of all different jurisdictions. So the United States is interesting just because, you have all these other churches from different countries come together, so that are all here, initially started by the immigrants that came. But now it's like an interesting situation because, in America, it's like we're like a mission frontier in the Orthodox eyes for a lot of the churches.
Right.
So you have the Antiochians here, the Greeks here, to a lesser degree, Romanians, Serbians.
Rocor.
Rocor. And then obviously the OCA. But yeah, so it's a really interesting dynamic. So in North Texas, we visited virtually every Orthodox church in North Texas before we chose to reside or to stay with the OCA.
Yeah. Did you ever go to the St. Seraphim of Saroff Cathedral in Dallas?
Oh yeah, that's the mother church of our diocese, and yeah, it was about 45 minutes where we were. Yeah, we would go there on occasion. Obviously, that's where blessed memory Archbishop Dimitri is buried, and yeah, so there's a lot of good things coming out of there.
I think that's where Richard Rowland goes, and
Oh.
I know there's a bunch of famous Vladimir Grigorenko.
Yep, that's where he resides.
Iconography there.
Yep, well, that's where he lives, and that's where he attends regularly. Yeah, so I've met Vladimir. I also met Pleshikov, Vladimir Pleshikov. That's his name, yes.
Doesn't he go to Holy Ascension?
No, he's a deacon and teaches at St. Vladimir's Seminary in New York.
Oh, okay. Who am I thinking of? The Russian composer who goes to Holy Ascension.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Again, I'm mixed up. Vladimir Pleshikov is the composer, and it's Permyakov. Dr. Permyakov is the one I'm thinking.
Oh, okay.
So, there, I got my coffee here still.
And we didn't mention that, but you right now are at Holy Ascension Orthodox, which is in Ion and Mount Pleasant, which Andrew Gould designed. It was like his first or second big church that he designed.
No,
and
it was
the amazing iconography is by
Vladimir Grigorenko.
Yeah, Vladimir Grigorenko.
Yeah. No, actually, Holy Ascension, in my understanding, is that this was his first church that he designed. It really kind of was the impetus for him to continue designing afterwards. So, yeah. So a lot of history here. Wow, going all over. Yeah. So, I mean, the reason I'm here in part is because there was a job offer that was opened here, and also a big bonus is that this is my wife's home area. So her whole family's in this general area of Charleston and a little bit north. So it's also a big perk.
Married? I thought you were a monk. So let's go back. So you were going to become a monk. You visited a couple monasteries. You ended up deciding, due to proximity, the Elder Ephraim Monastery. And then you were there for 5 years, but then because you were sick, you decided to leave, or they decided to tell you to leave, or how does that work? What is a novice, and how long can someone be a novice? And
well, in theory, you can be a novice indefinitely, but for the Elder Ephraim monasteries, typically in the States, was a minimum of 5 years as a novice, and then if things are agreeable with everyone, that the tonsure would be offered to you. And it was typically it's the Rasifor tonsure, not the schema tonsure yet. So that's how that kind of worked. Failing back a little bit. Yeah. So
people might not know what a Rasifor tonsure or a schema tonsure is, but what is the difference between the two? And correct my misunderstanding, because I thought the Great Schema was basically just a Russian thing, not a Greek thing. But are you saying it's also a Greek thing? So what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, so the Great Schema, as the tradition goes, was received via vision, an angelic vision, by Saint Pachomios, who is Greek. I mean, he was a Egyptian father, but yeah, he spoke Greek at least. So yeah, it was revealed to him, and it was the schema. And the schema, in a sense, is a testament, if you will, or a covenant of one giving their life to Christ fully and completely. That entailed certain rigid asceticism stuff, including prayer. for the most part, generally put. And then down the line, as things progress, they created different intermediary steps. So you had the schema, tonsure, which is what that was initially, which literally means like the cutting of your hair. And then down the line, they came up with what's called the small schema, and to differentiate that from schema, they call that the great schema. So great schema, small schema, and then eventually a rasiphor. And Greek is so nice in a sense because it's like naming literally what it is. So a rasiphor, all that means is it's the robe bearer. So one who wears this outer cassock kind of deal, looks like a robe.
That's the one that's black and white and it has skulls all over it, right?
No, that's a schema.
That's just schema.
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying rasiphor is one step higher than great schema?
No. Sorry. That was a little bit diluted explanation. So the ultimate highest is great schema. And then right below that is the little schema. And then below that is the rasiphor. So the rasiphor is the lowest on the totem pole in terms of tonsures.
So would Elder Ephraim be a great schema? And would he wear that
Yes, he was.
Awesome death metal looking garb?
No. So that's a Slavic.
You break. So,
did you hear me?
You covered the mic or something.
Okay. How about that?
Yeah,
most Slavs, that's a Slavic tradition to have that robe that looks like kind of like a wizard. No.
Yeah, or Jordan Peterson's coat.
Right. No, the modern iteration of the schema for the most part is actually it's like a cloth that you put under and you wear under, typically under your cassock, your outer cassock.
Okay.
And it fits into your belt. So, and it's like what's the word? It's not quite like a poncho, but it's like a front covering that you wear underneath your cassock, your outer cassock. Now the robe thing, that's a Slavic thing. And even my understanding is most Slavs, other Slavs don't even wear that. They wear the other one I'm talking about. So,
okay. So it's only very few of the Slavic monks who reach the great schema would even wear.
Right. Yeah. That's more of their tradition.
That garb.
But you'll never see a Greek.
Put a little picture up here so people can see. It's an awesome looking robe.
Yeah.
It's really cool, like, with all the skulls on it and the cross and it's
Yeah. So all that to say though is rasiphor means robe bearer, and little schema means you get some of the vows from the great schema, but not all of them. And then the great schema is like the full Monty. And going back, the rasiphor really isn't. They call it a tonsure, and it is a tonsure, but you don't really take any vows. You just, some prayers are said over you, and then they put on the robe for you, and then so.
But it would be a big no-no if you left after becoming a rasiphor, right?
Well, these are why these intermediary steps were made is to lessen the severity, if you will, the gravity of the situation. If one just becomes immediately a great schema and then walks away from it, like flippantly, it kind of loses it. It's not how it should be treated, So so rasiphor, it's like, well, you're in. It's just, and if you leave, it's, that's not good, but it's not as grievous as if you were a great schema and then leaving.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
And if you're a novice and you leave, like, that's normal. Or people,
I mean, in a sense,
it's like you're just discerning the call and you're living the lifestyle, and maybe it's for a time, but you're not committing to the rest of your life.
Right. Yeah. So a novitiate, I mean, the Greek word for it is dokimos, which means it can be understood one or two ways: to be tried or to try out, like to try out, basically. And in a sense, it's a lot like an engagement to a marriage. When you're engaged, it's you're engaged with that thing, but you're not yet fully committed to it because you haven't gone through with it yet. So the novitiate is that in the monastic sense, right? Is discerning that and living the life, without having the tonsure or the vows hanging over your head. So, yeah.
Okay.
And ultimately, I mean, coming back, I know we touched on that a little bit, but so I stayed there for 5 years, which would be the minimum for tonsure. And I was young. I mean, 28, 29 at that time. So I joined when I was 24. I was about 29 um, when I was leaving. And I think simply put, it wasn't to do with sickness per se. It was actually just, I think I wanted to be married. Although I didn't realize that at the time, but that's really what it was. So ultimately that's like, I tried this out, and the idea of doing this for the rest of my life, um, it's like, I don't think I want to do that. So thank God that I tried it out and I did what I had to do, and then realized, that was great, but ultimately it wasn't my calling to pursue monasticism fully for the rest of my life.
And then didn't you say you considered becoming a monk up at St. Tikhon's?
No, I never considered. Um, I believe, though, the door was open for me if I were to consider it. So St. Tikhon's, for those who don't know, it's one of the OCA monasteries as well as a seminary. It's like a hand in a glove, two institutions together, literally divided by a small strip of road. And so the monastery side of things, it's run by the abbot there, who I met in Texas. I was his driver during a Lenten retreat for a convent down there. And at that time, I don't think he was interested in having me try it out. But then when I came for seminary, uh, there was a possibility if I wanted it, but I didn't want it. So it never went further.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So,
But so after your novitiate, then you discerned a call to potentially become a priest. Is that right? So then you went to St. Tikhon's for seminary?
right. Yeah. So leaving the monastery, it was interesting because you realize you don't realize how much you changed until you leave, especially at the time period that I was at the monastery, being kind of in the middle of nowhere. So it was like a culture shock. It was like living in a dream. So, yeah. And I didn't know what I wanted to do at the time. My abbot recommended I would continue going to school again, go back to school for a master's, something with languages, because I really love languages, and especially Greek. So I really picked up on Greek and really studied it and got really into it. So I was like, well, maybe I'll do that. So I did make motions in that direction. I applied for a master's in a language program. And I was this close to doing it. But then at the same time, my priest back then, who I came back again after I left the monastery, recommended that I would consider going to seminary, which never occurred to me. That was always my dad's dream, who was Orthodox, to become a priest for himself. And I never saw that for me. But when somebody, especially your father confessor, asks you to consider it, like, I should probably consider it. So I did. And he goes, well, ask your spiritual father, who at the time was still my former abbot. And to my surprise, he goes, yeah, you should go to seminary. So that was really what kind of started the whole journey to seminary. And I held it very loosely. It's like, I'm single still, and I'm going to go, and all the doors opened for me to go. And funny enough, my father at the same time. And so I ended up going, but just like see what God has planned for me. So even maybe to be a monastic there was always a possibility, but remote at that time. But I was holding it loosely, But then I met my wife there, and so that kind of changed everything radically, very quickly. And it was the year of COVID, so that really led complications, and that was a big shift. So a lot of different changes going on at that time. But yeah. So go to seminary, and I got married in seminary, which, as beautiful as it is, I wouldn't recommend for anybody to do.
Why is that?
Seminary life, at least in the Orthodox Church, is very, very difficult, especially being attached to a monastery. So it's just, the life is very difficult, and it's a transition. It's a transitional focus in one's path. So to be married at the same time or in the midst of all that, which is again another transitional period, another aspect of one's life, and being newly married, it had its own unique challenges, especially being in the middle of nowhere and not having a lot of money and not being able to have a lot of money to begin with, because you can't really work. I mean, you can work a little, but not much, because you've got school, you got your studies, got all the services you have to go to. So that was a challenge, but it worked out. So I'm glad we did it when we did it.
That's good.
Yeah.
You said it was a big transition from the Greek monastery to then coming out of it. Now, I don't think we've totally talked that much so far about how difficult it was at the Elder Ephraim Monastery. So what would a typical day look like at the Elder Ephraim Monastery?
Well, again, every Elder Ephraim Monastery in the States, at least, vary a little bit, and because it depends on the abbess or abbot running the monastery. It's really up to them. So each one is different. So again, what I'm going to say is particular at a time of this monastery in Texas I was a part of, with our abbot's discretion. So it was his choosing and his kind of discretion, like I said, and how we were to conduct our prayers and our schedule. So our monastery was founded in 1996. Let me start here. I think it was the fifth male monastery or the fifth monastery altogether. I can't recall now the statistics, but anyways, it was founded in 1966 or 1996. Sorry, not 66. And it was the land was acquired from the state, I do believe, and it was previously run by some Sufi Muslims back in the, I don't know, 50s, 60s, 70s maybe. But before that, it was an old ranch back in the 19th century with like a smith shop and all that. It was like 1,000 acres, I think, altogether at one point before it got broken up. So yeah, so the property that the monastery got was like roughly 142 acres or something like that. But when the monastery came on, there was already a lot of buildings built on the land, and primarily from the Muslims that were there before they got booted for tax reasons, I believe, and including a mosque. So it was really actually keeping those foundations that the Muslims laid and then building on top of that, but building for like 50. So a typical monastery, like a monastery, ideally would be about 50 or so monks or nuns even living, plus or minus.
That's a lot.
Yeah, but that's what a monastery is. The Cenobitic lifestyle, the Cenobium or Cenobian, depending how you want to say it. But so we were building for 50, but there was only roughly about 10 of us, more or less. So 1/5.
Now, having 50, that would afford you the opportunity to do all the services, right? So if you had like a big monastery with 50 to 100 monks, then you would have, 6 hours of services every day? But then if it was like 10, like where you're talking about, of necessity, you have a lot of extra work and manual labor that you have to do to upkeep the place. Is that understanding correct?
Yeah, more or less. Also, the workload would be very different. If we were to have 50, it'd be much more regimented. So we were living what they called more like a skeet style. So a skeet is like a smaller brotherhood or sisterhood of like 5 or 10, maybe 15 at the most. And it's kind of a little bit more ragtag. Like for the day, if you needed to go get flour for food, or like a big order was coming in and like you have to stop everything and everybody goes to help, take all that stuff up, for example. So for us, it was building a huge complex, basically, that was decades in the making. And that's a lot of work for 10 or so guys. I mean, obviously we had other contractors to do some other of the jobs, but yeah, it was a lot of work. But so, sometimes like one day you'd wake up and it's like, oh, okay, we got to stop trimming the wood inside this building. We got to lay down this pipe for a leach field we're putting in next week or something, for example. So everybody would stop what they're doing and go help out, like trenching or digging for something, helping out. I remember one time we out of an act of love and from our abbot to a neighbor of ours who was part of the community, the larger community, that he volunteered sent some of us to help him build his brewery. So I remember that was like a month and a half of building a
Okay.
brewery. Yeah. But it's like
That's
kind of like,
cool.
yeah, it's cool. And then the majority of the construction workers were all Cretan. None of them spoke English. So it's just like learning, that kind of engagement, and then us helping them out and communicating on a construction project. But yeah, so it could be anything, that can happen. Uh, but if we were to have 50 people, then we could have a lot more sustainability, which is always the ideal for a monastery, a form of self-sustaining at the very least, which we were not quite there yet, at least at that time, just because we were so small. And
But let's say it's not a big project at the moment. Like you're not building a brewery for a neighbor, but it's the like the middle of the year, maybe not even Lent. It'd be interesting to juxtapose the two, Lenten and non-fasting season. And you don't have a tremendous project. You're just doing, the typical building stuff that you would normally do. When would you wake up? How many services would you have that day? How much would you be required to pray by yourself? What would the day look like?
sure, okay, if it wasn't Lent or Domitian fast, this is what the typical day would look like. Um, so where do I want to start? So when I first arrived, because the schedule would change ever so slightly at my time there, but when I first started, I think this is a good model for it. We would wake up at 2 a.m. and to do our personal prayer rule and our personal vigil from 2 to about 6 a.m. So 4 hours. And then from 6 to about 7:15, we would go to liturgy with a first hour read beforehand. So very simple. And then after liturgy, we would have a small breakfast of some sort. And then we go back to sleep for about 2.5 hours. And then at 10:30, we would go to work. So it'd be work day. And then there'll be lunch, I think around 12:30 or 1. I think somewhere around there. So we go for lunch for a little bit, and then we go and work. And now, depending if it was the summer months when the days are longer, we would forego Vespers, that's the evening service, and work until 7 at night or something like that, and then have dinner. If it was the winter, close to Christmas time, we would have Vespers every day, almost every day, because the length of days really mattered. So anyway, so we'd have our lunch around 7:15, or dinner rather, and then we'd do cleanup. And sometimes if it was a formal meal, so that's another thing. If it was informal or formal, we would have a reading while we were eating and this whole thing. And then we'd have a small compline service done afterwards while the rest of us were cleaning the place. It was informal, no services at all, and we just clean. clean up, and then go to our respective rooms and go to bed, or read, get ready for the next day. And then
And when would that be? When would you be going to bed?
well, probably 9:30, 9:30. Yeah.
So if you're super diligent, you can
Well,
get.
you're tired because you do. It's all, you're waking up at 2 a.m. and
That's what I'm saying. So best case scenario, non-fasting season, you go to bed at 9 p.m., you wake up at 2 a.m., so that's 5 hours of sleep.
yeah,
But then after not eating but praying from 2 till 7, 8 o'clock, and then the service, then you could get 2 more hours of sleep. So you could hypothetically, in a non-fasting season, if you went straight to bed when you could go to bed, get 7 hours of sleep maximum.
yeah, and that's the theory. But you're always dog tired because a lot of the work we were doing was hard labor. So you'd be doing a lot. And then toward the end of my time there, I was working. It was an unusual period, but I was doing 12, 14-hour days every day, including Sunday. Yeah, so that was a lot. And then trying to sleep, and I think I only slept, 2 or 3 hours or something like that. Yeah.
Is that when weren't you raising dogs or something like that?
No,
You were raising puppies?
That's a different time before that. Yeah. Yeah, there's that. And that I couldn't tell you exactly the schedule. It was on the whims of the young puppies. No, this other one was an iconography project that we're trying to do, and it was a deadline, like hard deadline, for a cathedral, the Greek cathedral in Houston, Texas. And so I was one of the apprentices helping out all that. But it was like around the clock because we had to get it all done, in the studio, and then shipped, transported to Houston, which is about 3 hours or something like that from where we were. So, and then install them.
Dang. So you're praying or working all day long. You're getting 6, maximum 7 hours of sleep, and half of the non-fasting week you're eating totally vegan. So no dairy, no eggs, no meat, no fish. What's it like during Lent? If that's the typical for y'all, for your particular Ephraimite monastery, if that was typical during non-fasting, how crazy was it during a fasting season?
Well, again, we didn't do the full thing, but your prayer rule doubles during Lent. And with an additional, so we didn't talk about it, but you can see it behind me. So we have those things called prayer ropes.
Right.
And it's a typical length.
Sometimes I have one. I like to keep with me, and then I lose it. And so I think I'm on my 7th prayer rope, which
that's a lot, yeah.
There's probably a special curse for that or something.
Sure. Yeah.
Something I'll have to give an account for on the day of judgment, but I think this is like my 7th or 8th prayer rope.
Nice.
Because they keep getting lost somehow.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, we had that's funny, but we had a 300 knotter, so 300 knots on the prayer rope. And that would, so our typical prayer rule is we would do a round, so 300, and that'd be like one set, basically, is how I would call it. But so our typical prayer rule was 900 knots, so 3 rounds of the prayer rope, of the Jesus prayer, and then 1 round that is 300 to the Theotokos, that's the Mother of God, the Virgin Mary, and then ideally 50 prostrations. Sometimes we did less than that. It just depends because we worked so hard. And then so for Lent, that's all doubled. And then on addition to that, throughout the day in our vigil, we had to do, well, the call was 25 additional rounds of the prayer rope to Christ, every day. But we did 15, I think. Our abbot reduced it down to 15. But yeah, Lent. So that was our prayer rule. Trying to remember now. So Wednesdays and Fridays every day we had a service in the morning. So what would replace liturgy was our Vespers would be in the morning. But Wednesdays and Fridays would be pre-sanctified. And then the evening, we would have a great compline service. For the most part, sometimes depending on the day of the week of Lent, there'd be a special service depending. But typically, it was great compline. We would have our formal meal, which is our supper or dinner in the morning. So after the Vespers in the morning, say 10:30, it gets out. So we have our meal, our dinner, 10:30 in the morning. And then we'd work after that all day until the evening.
So no break to sleep.
No break. And and then we would work all day and then go to great compline in the evening and then have dry food. So there'll be leftovers from the meal that morning, which was always kind of either lentils or split pea, rice, fasting stuff. So vegan, not a lot of oil, some tahini, and dried fruit and nuts was the primary diet of Lent, during the weekdays. Yeah.
While doing manual labor and getting, 4 to 5 hours of sleep a night?
No, I mean, it was about 6 or 7 hours. Yeah. It's all at once. All right. Yeah, because you would go to bed.
You said 9 to 2, right?
Right, but during Lent, after Great Compline, which is it's not a terribly lengthy service, you would have your free time 7:30. So ideally, you could go to bed right then and there 7:30 in the evening or so.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, it's about
Free
6 or 7
7:30,
hours.
get in bed by 8. You could get 6 hours during
Something like that. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So yeah, that
Eat
was
twice a day.
twice a day.
Is that what you said? You ate twice a day?
Right. You had the official meal, the formal meal in the morning, and then in the evening you would have a dry food snack kind of deal. It was informal. Yeah. Yeah. That was a typical. And then the weekends would be relatively normal in their schedule. It's just fasting food. So yeah. So that was the schedule for Lent. Yeah.
Dang. And I remember talking to you about this, and you said, "Oh, that's not even that crazy asceticism." What do you mean? That's insane.
Well, there's always a big.
I can imagine how strict that is, but
yeah. Well,
I
didn't
said
even
there's
think about it.
one monastery on Athos that's Saint Dionysius, where they sleep 2 hours a night or something like that.
Well, I don't know their schedule, but they are very, very hardcore. Yeah. Yeah. Much hardcore. According to my abbot at the time, he says, if you can last 6 months there, then the great schema, immediately.
That's insane.
Yeah. But yeah, so that was kind of our life, and when we talk about it, it's dang, I guess that does sound kind of hardcore or whatever, but when you're doing it, it's just what you do. It's just your life. It's your way of life, and it's your community. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about that. It's just until afterwards you look back on it and then you kind of recount oh, what did we do? It's oh my gosh, I did that, kind of deal.
And you're a tall guy. I mean, you're what, 6'1", 6'2"?
6'2", yeah.
And you used to play football. I would say what'd you weigh in high school? What, 240, 250?
No, I was 235 on average.
Okay.
Yeah.
But kind of a bulky guy. Used to
power
lift.
I played line on football, so naturally a little bit bulkier. And
okay.
And then when I sustained a knee injury took me out of the game completely. The sport. I kept my eating habits, and I think I gained a little bit more weight. So I don't know how much I weighed, but it was probably more than 235.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
But then at the monastery, you got down to what?
135, I think, is the lowest weight I've ever been, and in terms of my age. I mean,
135 pounds.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
jump.
beforehand
Could
though,
you see every rib?
um, I can't recall now. I can't recall. We didn't really have mirrors, so I didn't really think to look. I just sort of, was, just I don't know, doing my job, doing my routine.
There's no mirrors at the monastery?
No mirrors, no.
Is that a thing or
At least in the Elder Ephraim Monasteries, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just to discourage um, vanity, which is a thing. Actually, I saw this clear as day in the California monastery I visited. So they had mirrors, and there was a novice that was preoccupied with his image in the mirror, and it was like, it felt like it was in a movie, just like the way everything was, and like I was the observer as was young. So seeing him with the door open in the bathroom, like him, like, I don't know, doing something to his hair or something in this mirror, but he's like taking a long time. And then these two older monks, higher monks, so they're priest monks, were sitting and they saw him, and then they just like grimaced and they were whispering to each other. And then the next day, the mirrors were removed. So, yeah,
interesting?
yeah. So I guess not only just an Elder Ephraim monastery, but yeah. So, but it just depends. So,
And monks, they got the long beards because it's a thing against vanity, right? So you're really not allowed to shave or cut anything unless there's a practical reason, like cutting off part of your mustache so your mustache doesn't get in
sure.
your food.
Yeah, yeah. It depends. And again, this is one of those things that it just depends where you are. And in terms of letting your beard grow out and not cutting your hair, um, I couldn't tell you the full historical reasons for that, but that's what it is today for sure. Is you don't cut your hair and you don't cut your beard. It could be in part of vanity, or to counteract that perhaps. But I think the bigger reason, in my mind, again, this is just my kind of perspective, um, is in the Old Testament, Leviticus, where you had I forget the name of them, but Samson was one of them, where
The
you don't touch your like
Levite,
anointed ones or something like that, and you don't touch a razor to your beard or to your head.
right?
Um, so my suspicion is that somehow it's something linked with that, at least later in the monastics, because I'm pretty sure that, um,
Nazarite.
yeah, Nazarites, yeah, yeah, so something like that. But again, I honestly don't know the real reason why we do that. We just do that. So I guess it's a sign of your commitment, you know. So, yep,
Okay.
yeah.
I feel like everyone who becomes an Orthodox catechumen is like, I gotta grow a beard now and long hair.
Well, that's the convert mentality. Yeah, it's like you
Like
discovered this new thing, so you got to go, all in, head deep.
like my friend Hamilton. He has the stupidest looking hair I've ever seen. It's like it's like 3 times as long as Albert Einstein's hair, but just as frizzy.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, but
So let this podcast be a shame on Hamilton for his stupid looking hair that no one likes.
yeah, yeah. I don't know if I could grow my hair out again. We'll see. I prefer it short.
So you got out to 130 pounds in the monastery. That's insane.
Right. I mean, I got sick and couldn't really eat anything, but uh, but yeah, I mean, I recovered and I gained weight back gradually. Yeah. I mean, it was fine. I mean, I didn't feel like in pain or anything, you know, just my body was working through something, some kind of stress. Stress does funny things to you.
So what was it like having fried chicken and macaroni and cheese for the first time after coming out of the monastery and not eating that for 5 years?
Well, I can't recall the first time I had fried chicken after the monastery, but I do recall the first meal I had after the monastery, which was so my parents, you know, came to help me leave. So they came and packed up my stuff. And then we drove for maybe 30 minutes out and we stopped at a Mexican restaurant. And there I had some good meat. And that was the first time I had, I think it was like beef, some kind of fajita maybe. Um, and
Did it make
yeah,
you sick?
no, nope, I was not sick.
Wow.
In fact, yeah, so at least for me, I feel that in my diet, I am very happy that meat is in my diet.
Right.
So that's definitely helped a lot. So I don't think I could, when somebody says, "Oh, you should, have a bowl of beans or lentils," I'm like, I can't have that, especially after 5 in the evening. It really tears me up. But, um, but yeah, so I'm grateful that I have meat back in my life. That's my long lost love. So, but yeah, so when I left the monastery, I still had these kind of weaknesses. Um, and then I slowly got better. In about 6 months, 8 months maybe. My stamina improved. My strength improved. Yeah, I was able to do a lot more things afterwards. That I think mostly too was because of rest and a change of diet.
Okay. Wow. So at the monastery you were at, they typically only had what, services wise, a couple hours a day. But at some monasteries, it's like 6 to 10 hours a day of services, right? What
Um,
what determines the difference between different monasteries?
just well, all the services. It's just like how much of the service do we want to do? Every day there is a lot of services you can do every day that's called for in what we call the typicon, right? Um, the order of services and what's called for that particular season. So there are a lot of services. So if you were to do all of them to the full length, I mean, they'll last a long time. Um, so it's the question of like, well, how much do you want to do? You know, kind of how I understand it. So rather it's 6 or 10 hours, maybe, I don't know. Um, but I mean, the amount of hours we had at our monastery at the time was about, if we had Vespers, not counting Sundays, it would be about 2.5 hours worth of services every day. Like just like the daily, nothing special going on.
What about St. Tikhon's, for example?
Oh, St. Tigon's, they do a lot more services, but because uh, it serves as sort of a pedagogy for clergy and training, as well as for just as part of the monks' routine there. So yeah, so they do. Let's see here, 9:30 to 4:30. Say, yeah, they're about 6 or 7 hours maybe a day.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's a little looser there, right? Ascetic wise, like it's not as much manual labor.
It's still manual
You,
labor.
you
Uh,
could get 8 hours of sleep a night, maybe.
Maybe I'm honestly not privy to what they were doing exactly in terms of the routine. But they're in services a lot more, and I know that they do work, a lot of work. So they still work hard. It's just a different, maybe a different way. I don't know how to describe it. They weren't doing like construction as much as we were, which is a different animal, I think. But
Now, what about the liturgies themselves? Because that's interesting. So you go from Greek, which is more Byzantine chant, and then at St. Tikhon's, that's more of the Slavic tradition. What's some big differences liturgically between the two? I mean, maybe that's too broad of a question, but
Well, yeah, I mean, in the broad answer, there really isn't a difference as much in terms of the liturgics. I mean, they're essentially very similar, very much the same, because it comes from the same source. Now, in terms of like these little movements, liturgical movements, if you will, those are the things that vary or can vary. Yeah. But
what do you
all in
mean by
all,
liturgical movements? Do you mean like crossing yourself in a
well, no,
certain
like
way, or
the sensing pattern for the clergy is different. Obviously the music's different. Um, well, if we're going to music, which is what I can recall right now, the Byzantine chant, they'll well, depending what it is, they'll sometimes sing certain hymns slower or more grander. Whereas for the Slavs, it's nothing special, or it's not as special. So it can go by quicker. Yeah, it's just these small things, small things. In the liturgy, the Byzantine practice, the modern practice right now is they don't. Their antiphons are just the refrains only for daily liturgy, at least. So it's a very simple thing. Whereas usually you chant psalms, whether it's what we call the typical psalms or the daily, which are like Psalm 92 or 93 or something like that. So it's more of like an abbreviation, if you will. But aside from that, I mean, it's pretty much the same, just those smaller differences.
so a divine liturgy is basically identical between an American Greek church and American Russian church.
I mean, minus the little movements, the difference of movements. Yeah, it's the same. Yeah.
But when it comes to cutting stuff, because it seems like sometimes Greek liturgies are like 50 minutes to an hour, and then I've
Yeah.
been to, an OCA liturgy that's like an hour and 45 minutes.
Well,
So
it depends. It just
obviously
depends.
there's some of a difference.
Well, it
Difference
could do
there.
with the choir. I mean, it depends. Obviously, if you have a cantor, it goes a lot quicker than if you have like a full on choir. For some reason, the more people you have involved in the service, the longer it takes. Um, I mean, another thing is, goodness gracious, the way they prepare the communion is, in terms of the loaves that they do now. So the Byzantine have two big loaves, and the Russians have, no, is that right? Yeah, the Russians, I could be mixing that around. Have five loaves. I think that's the case. Yeah. So it's just like these smaller things. Yeah. So the Greek liturgy might go faster because some things are abbreviated. Like I said, the antiphons are shorter because it's just the refrains. It's not even the psalms themselves that you sing. Whereas in the OCA church, you typically sing the psalms. At the beginning of the antiphons, which is the beginning part of liturgy. Um, and then, well, what else is there? Um, there's just some things that are just spoken in the Greek church, like in the liturgy, rather than sung, which obviously takes shorter. Um, there's a whole little thing with the epistle reading and like what comes before and after. I'm really simplifying this, but in the Byzantine church, the Byzantine Rite, it's less things than in the Slavic church. So it's like those little things, just like, oh, just remove this here, or just not omit that there, then all that adds up to, a shorter time.
Right. Are there things that are more optional or
Yeah, it's
less
just
optional?
what the practice is, and, the reality is, I mean, for example, the antiphons, I mean, what's the point of the antiphons? Well, historically, my understanding of it, at least, is that it was used as a preparation for the actual liturgy, and then it was, at least in Constantinople, when the emperor was still marching or processing in. It was just kind of not really filler, but it was kind of, the service is going, but um, communion hasn't arrived yet, and the emperor hasn't arrived yet. You know. So then the emperor would arrive after the antiphons or just at the end of the antiphons, and there's this whole liturgical action that happens then that we don't really do as much or really at all almost today. So it's like remnants.
Does
So
that have something to do with the royal hours?
no. Royal hours are something else completely different. Nothing to do with the emperor.
Okay. What are the royal hours? Sorry, this is super in the weeds, and people listening to this are
Tangential.
going to be like, what the heck is the royal hours? But
Well, I couldn't tell you the historical precedence of it fully, but how they function though, I can tell you. So you had a period of time, which is the nativity period to about Theophany, which is January 6th, and then it's after feast. So whatever that time is, it was like one big festal occasion. So the royal hours are applied to those two big feast days, Nativity and Theophany, and then obviously Holy Friday as well. So all they are they're like our service of the hours, but upgrade. It's like premium hours, because then you have selected psalms. So every hour has 3 psalms that's read. And so for the daily cycle, the typical hour service, they're fixed. For the royal hours, 2 of the 3 are changed to fit the theme and the occasion of the feast. And so they're unique to those particular times. So Holy Friday, Theophany, and Nativity. And then also you have a gospel reading and an epistle reading with some psalmic verses, if you will, and some hymns sung in the midst of it too. So some singing in the hours. And the
I don't
royal
think I
hours,
knew that royal hours were also nativity and theophany.
Yep. Yeah. So there's 3 altogether, in the current practice at least. Yeah, and then you do all 4 hours. So the tradition, now is you have first, third, sixth, and ninth hour, and then you do them all together, one after the next. And each one has a different gospel reading, a different epistle reading, sometimes different hymns. Sometimes, yeah, that's what you do. And it's a service that is designed to prepare oneself for the festal occasion. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Now,
Before you
how do
get
hymns work? So let me be more specific. So I know you have a lot of hymns that are specifically designed for a particular saint, for example. If it's the feast day of St. John of Chrysostom, you'd have hymns to St. John of Chrysostom. And most of the hymns that you have are super ancient and super old, right?
Well, it depends.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, a lot of them are old. Well, a lot of it are
Are
hymnography,
people
right?
writing new hymns? And if they are, how do they get integrated into practice?
And how they get integrated, I don't know if I can answer that question fully, but there
Like,
are
are there modern hymn writers for the Orthodox Church, and in
yes.
200 years, everyone might be singing these hymns?
Yeah. Well, no, we are singing them today from hymnographers from the 60s, or even more recent even. Yeah, like so when a saint gets canonized, I mean, who's going to write? Like, for example, Saint Olga, which is canonized very recently. So like, who's going to write her hymnography, right? So yeah, there are hymnographers. In terms of how they're implemented, I can imagine only like it's maybe like the blessing of the synod or an approval of the synod, bishops, some kind of committee maybe, is my guess. But as to the particulars, I'm not sure about that. But yeah, no, the hymns vary. I mean, in terms of their age. I mean, our oldest hymn that I'm aware of is the Gladsome Light hymn, which is ancient. And it's a fixed hymn, meaning that we do it for every Vespers. But in terms of the movable hymnography, like that's dedicated to the saint of the day, right, which is a big thing for our service. Yeah, that's a whole hodgepodge of like, it could be from the 800s to the 1600s to now. It just depends on who the saint is and who the hymnographer is. And sometimes you'll have different hymnographers writing different hymns that serve the same function, but they're different in content about the same saint. So you could do like, I don't know, for example, Saint Cosmas as opposed to St. John of Damascus. They both wrote, say, about nativity. So he was like, well, we could do one or the other, or we could do both, So
you have an option.
yeah, there's options. Yeah, there's options. In the English language, it's a little harder because you're limited to what's available in translations. Because a
I
lot
thought it
of
was pretty fixed. Like, this is the service. There's not really, like, the flexibility is maybe there's a better setting of the Fossiller here or there, or maybe, you could do Kievan tone versus Obi-Code tone. But I didn't know that there was actual text selection that you could do
yeah, you
for
could
the
do,
hymns
you
hymns
could do text
itself.
selection, but it serves as the same function in the service. So it's not like you're changing the service per se. It's
Like it's called for hymns. It's called for like a hymn to a specific saint, and there's multiple options, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So, for example, like in the canon, which is probably the most variable segment of any of our services, the Matins canon. So it's called to do, like, I don't know, 14 triparia, which is like 14 little hymn things with refrains in there. And then you do these singy bits called irmi or irmos, which again, that's a whole nother thing that gets into it. But yeah, so you can try and choose a selection of hymns and how much you want to do.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
And you've done both traditions. Do you
Yes.
have an aesthetic preference, one over the other? The Byzantine versus the Slavic? I mean, listening to really good Byzantine, like I was preparing for an interview with John Michael Boyer, so I was listening to the Divine Liturgy of Chrysostom in English to Byzantine chant. And it's definitely a vibe. I mean, it's cool. I love it. But, I mean, I have to admit, I have been to Greek churches where it's not so great.
Yeah.
And so, whereas there's a certain, I feel like the simple tones of the Slavic tradition, even if they're a little out of tune, they're still relatively beautiful in and of themselves, just because it's like traditional Western harmony that I'm looking for. But it would be hard for me to differentiate, also as not Orthodox, between what my aesthetic prejudice would be, which I would prefer over the best of the Slavic versus the best of the Byzantine.
Yeah.
For a piece, for sure. I love Chesnikov, I love like the super high late choral music of the Russian tradition. But what is preferable for an Orthodox aesthetic for, a 3-hour service might be slightly different. You have any thoughts on that?
Well, again, this is all very variable. But I agree, nothing's worse than badly done chant of any kind, Byzantine or not. Yeah. So a current practice, and I've seen this in a lot of, actually, well, maybe not a lot, but some Antiochian churches where they've integrated in their services both Byzantine chant and high form Slavic music, and done very well. So maybe that could be a look in the future of what Orthodoxy in America could look like down the road, even more so than being stuck, or, not stuck, but being remaining in one particular tradition or another. But to understand too that chant itself, I mean, the 4-part stuff, yeah, it's beautiful, and the Russian stuff. But even before that, I mean, before the 18th century, a lot of the Russian music was chant-based, and that came out of an evolution from Byzantine chant. Now, it's not the Byzantine chant we have today, but it is something approximate. And over time, hundreds of years, the music evolves into its own uniqueness. So then the Russians, the Slavs, not just the Russians, the Slavs developed their own unique form of chant that were based off of Byzantine.
Well, now they had also like Znameni chant, right? Was Znameni derived from Byzantine?
Yes, Znameni, all Znameni means is sign. And yeah, so when you say Znameni, it can mean a lot of things. But yes, Um, it evolved, if you will, from Byzantine chant. However, that was. I mean, really, it comes down to the basics of our language, right? If you ever listen to Slavonic or any Slavic-based language, and you compare that to Greek, very different. And I think that definitely informs the way phrasing and the musicality of the chant goes in time. You know, trying to fit Slavonic into metered Greek modes is a very difficult thing to do. And so,
And does the octo echo system work differently in the Greek versus the Russian?
no, it's the same. And it's octoikos. Yeah, octoikos. No, it's the same in terms of the concept. Because it was introduced. Gosh, who was the his name's eluding me, but this was like 800s, 900s. So it was
John of Damascus?
no, I don't think so. I think it was this. I could be wrong. I think it could be a Studite monk, but I could be wrong. It's
For
somewhere
those
in
who
that
don't
area.
know, what is a Studite? Are
The
those
Studite,
the one
well,
on the
it's from the
pillars,
Studite,
or that's something else?
the Studite Monastery, which is where we get a
Okay.
lot of our forms of liturgics today that we still practice today. Is from
So
the
what
Studite.
is a Studite monastery?
It
I
was
think I was mixing it up in my head with stylite. And a stylite is the monks who are on the pillars, right?
on the pillars, yeah. So the Studite Monastery was just an old monastery that was, I mean, it was a crowning monastery. It had a lot of saints there, and they developed a form of service that carried on through the rest of the Orthodox Church since then. And that was in the 800s, I think, 900s.
Was that with a particular emphasis on like academic work or liturgical work or something like
It
that?
could be. Yeah, I mean, there were definitely academics, but yeah, in terms of all the intricacies and nuances of that, I couldn't tell you.
Okay,
But
so it's not related to study, like Studite study.
no,
Okay.
not the same. Um, but yeah. So what was I talking about? So we're talking about the services. Oh yeah, the music, chant.
The octo echoes
Oh,
between the two.
octoikos. Yeah, yeah. So that's all the same because the Greeks, when they evangelized or missionized the Slavs, um, a lot of that was carried over, including my understanding the octoikos, as well as the chant-based
Okay.
stuff. Yeah.
Sort of brings up how music is integrated into the Orthodox Church to begin with. Now, I know there's a big push right now for American Orthodox music. And, right, Olivia, didn't she write a hymn of Cassiani?
My wife? No, she did
Or
not
what
write
was it?
the hymn of Cassiani. But she,
The thing during a Holy Week.
yeah, yeah. So she wrote a new musical setting to the Bridegroom Matins Ex Apostolarium, which is a type
Okay,
of
that's
hymn.
what it was.
A type of hymn, yeah. So she did it in the style of, well, not really the style of. It's very much done in the kind of the Appalachian mode, if you will.
Was that the woman who had fallen into many sins when perceiving thy divinity?
Well, okay, so you're talking about the hymn of Cassiani.
Wait, so that's the hymn of Cassiani. That's not what she said. She said what's the text that she said?
It's a Thy Bridal Chamber, something like that.
Thy bridal chamber. That's what it
Yeah,
was. Okay.
yeah. So that's the thing she said, which was, there's appeal to it, and she wrote it not because like, oh, I'm going to do something in Appalachian. It's like she did it as a gift, as a present for our rector, that's his background in Appalachian music and all that. So it was more like a surprise gift for him, and that's the whole reason it came about in the first place. Is that she wanted to do something special because Holy Week is
Well, now
hard.
there's multiple settings, right? There's multiple of these Appalachian Orthodox sounding hymns.
As far as I understand, yeah, that it's ongoing and it's becoming more and more popular. Yeah, we
What do
have
you think of all that?
I think it's great. Yeah, I mean these things happen organically. I mean it's like what does it say that like musical settings are not necessarily dogmatic. However, there is a tradition that one has to respect. So it's always like this kind of like balance, if you will, that where as things move forward, that things will change and that has to be okay, but it can't be just like it can't be like pretentious, or I don't know how to describe that. It's like it has to be organic, kind of.
Not innovative for innovation's sake.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, this has to happen over time, and you see that with, I know that in Russia, before counterpoint was introduced, like counterpoint was considered an abomination. Um, but then, obviously that went out with the, like high Russian music in the later centuries. Uh, but not without detriment. That's when the great schism happened in the Russian church. Um,
Or was a lot of that over counterpoint
in part, in part.
between the old believers and the?
Yeah, that's just a litany. That's like one out of many litanies of grievances that the old believers had a problem with. But yeah, that was a big one.
Okay, wow.
So like to say that, like, if we were just, then even then it's like, well, say if the Greek missionaries that missionized the Slavs, and say that the music that was introduced then, like, should we just retain that only and not do anything different, or these things have to happen naturally. So that's why I'm saying, it's like the tradition's important, but at the same time, it's not like fixed like dogma.
Which brings up, what do you do in America? And there is a Western Rite Orthodox, right? Like the Antiochians have a Western Rite, Brocor has a Western Rite. Almost every priest that I've ever talked to hates the Western Rite and wish that it didn't exist, because they're like, the Eastern liturgies are better and the Western doesn't know what they're doing. And, I've had some other conversations where people said, well, it's a problem because the bishops are all Eastern Rite, and then they'll have one Western Rite church, and then they don't know what to do when they go to the Western Rite church. And so really there should be a college of bishops that's all Western Rite if you're going to have a legitimate Western Rite. So, what are your opinions on Western Rite music? Would there ever be a true, fusion of the two? Or would that be anathema because
I said maybe in time there could be something, it could grow into its own. It's just, I think it's still in its infancy stage, relatively speaking. And these things just take time. They take time. I don't think it's
That's tough because there's Byzantine chant, there's Slavic chant, there's, I feel like there's disparate traditions even within the Orthodox in America itself.
Well,
so then to try to marry that with like Gregorian chant, for example,
would
seem like.
Yeah, I mean, Gregorian chant, there is Gregorian chant done in the Orthodox Church. I know that. Yeah, so that's done, and that's not even, I don't even know if that's Western Rite. But yeah, no, there's a Gregorian system. I think it's a monastery in Canada. One of my classmates in seminary did a whole thesis, and that was one big aspect of it.
Gregorian chant utilized in
American Orthodox music in today's, and yeah, so that was a facet of it. Yeah, so I mean, I have nothing against Western Rite. I mean, I just think it's one of those things that's kind of budding, and it's just going to take time for it to grow. And the music's fine. I mean, it's fine. I think it's fine. Just gotta let it grow into its own thing, and that just takes time.
So, well, and they have organs, right? And that's I think so. Anathema to most to most other Orthodox.
Well, I mean, the Greek Church uses an organ. Antiochians sometimes use an organ. I believe sometimes, but yeah, it's just
they just don't really know how to use the organ.
What's that?
They just don't know how to use the organ.
Well, maybe, I don't know. I can't say one way or the other. I don't think I've ever sat in a Greek service. That's like a parish service.
Really, just monastery services.
Yeah, monastery services, which is all Byzantine chant. So,
I'd imagine it would be difficult because the tuning is so wildly different. I mean, it's not equal temperament in the slightest. It's not even like approximated to equal temperament. And I was reading through the, Byzantine chant manual where it's like 12 microtones, which is like the same as our whole step, but then it's 10 and then it's 8. And so even just getting up to the 4th is a totally different tetrachord and that's in soft diatonic, which I, as of yet, don't totally understand the difference between soft diatonic and hard diatonic and soft chromatic and hard chromatic. But all tuned different. It's more similar to Pythagorean tuning than
Right.
it is, a regular Western tuning.
Well, it's
And
just
so
one
it's
of
like
those.
yeah.
It's just one of those things, like, yeah, the theory makes it look a lot harder than what it really is. Really, I'd say 98% of Byzantine chanters don't even know that that's what all requires. That's the difference. They just know it. It's just like what you hear, and it's like the intuition. You know, um, yeah. But I understand what you're saying. But it is a different system. But I mean, with the organ, that's the thing is there was no Byzantine chant in the Greek Church. It was like a very common chant, if you will, of a Greek style that wasn't Byzantine, and that still goes on today. Although,
So that's a different version of chant.
yeah, it's
Oh,
not, it's not Byzantine in the slightest. Um,
okay.
yeah, and obviously, I think that's changing. My impression is it's changing. I don't know. Like it seems like Byzantine chant is definitely growing more and more, both with the Greeks and the Romanians. Romanians particularly too. Uh, I'm sure there's other
I mean,
groups
is
too.
there Romanian chant that's distinct from Byzantine, like there is Georgian?
No, 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 no. Well, the Byzantine chant, in terms of the Byzantine chant, it's the exact same, minus maybe a few minor things, perhaps, but it is the same. I just think my impression is that the Romanians, on the whole, tend to strive for accuracy, whereas for Greeks, as much as I love them, love the. It's kind of like it's the spirit of it. It's the gesture.
What were you saying about the Byzantine chant and the Romanian versus, Georgians have their own
Yeah.
tradition, which is its own form of chant. Do Romanians have that, or it's mostly
Well,
Byzantine?
I think they have their own thing, perhaps, but what I'm more familiar with is their take on Byzantine chant, which is more or less the same thing. It's just slightly different, but it is Byzantine chant. And as it was relayed to me by one Romanian chanter, that it's like about maybe a third or half, maybe, of Romania is really into Byzantine chant, and that's what they like to do, while the other half is not so much. Um, So, but yeah, so Byzantine chant though, but a lot of Byzantine chanters in America, at least personally that I know, I mean, there are some Greeks, but the majority of them are Romanian. Um, yeah,
Okay,
even the one
interesting.
here, the Byzantine, one of the main. Oh no, no, so he's the former Byzantine chanter here, but he was a Byzantine chanter, and he is a Byzantine chanter. He just doesn't do it so much officially for the church, but he's Romanian. Uh, yeah,
Okay. And, well, yeah, I just feel like it'd be different because of the tuning and all of that. I feel like it's not as necessarily conducive to the organ,
right. Well,
because of
you'll never hear it put together like
the way
that.
it's strung.
Yeah, yeah, no, you can't.
And it doesn't make sense. I feel like it's melismatic with an eson, with a drone. Like that doesn't. I don't know. It just doesn't seem to make as much
Right,
sense to the way the Gregorian chant ends up getting developed in the later Western
right.
classical music. I'm not sure that Byzantine chant could do the
No,
same thing. I mean, maybe it
well,
could, but
again, the organ, yeah, they don't use the organ for Byzantine chant. It's like for their like little simplified choir 4-part chant. So it's very much the kind of in the Western sense, not at all Byzantine in that regard.
yeah.
But I know that they have apps, programs on like iPads that you can have an ESON like given to you depending on what mode you're doing, and it's given to you in like kind of like the correct intervals and all that and the tuning. Uh, yeah,
Interesting. And one fascinating thing you told me about, which I've never heard of before, you said there's an Orthodox monastery in Germany that basically reinvented an old form of medieval German chant.
I'm not sure about reinvented is the word for that, but maybe. Yeah, just my understanding is that it's this idea of what mission is and like what like groups of people are or who they are. So in this case, I think they're Greek, or rather the abbot is. I think they're Greek. Came to Germany and they did a thing where they created a monastery, but it was done uh, where they took sort of the native German elements, so their architecture, their music, that kind of thing, and incorporated it rather into sort of the ethos and the aesthetic of this particular monastery. But the idea is that all societies and all their cultural stuff are equally valid across the board. You know, it's just like God coming and redeeming those things and elevating those things in a sense. You know, you see that in a way in Alaska with the natives there. And in Germany, it's a similar kind of premise. Albania as another one, but it's taking what's already there that's in the culture, and it's in a way it's like elevating it and applying it to the church. Just saying the Alaskan culture, you know, really the music in Alaska is Russian primarily, but they do a bit of Slavonic and a bit of their own tribal language, whether it's Yupik or the other ones. Aleut, I think, is another one.
Okay. And there's a couple places where they basically have their own version of the tones, right?
Yes, but again, it's in the similar concept with the Russians, where again, you know, with the Byzantine chant, the 8 tones is something that's the tones, the modes actually is more appropriate. The modes for Byzantine is the tuning, the scales. It's a type of scales, the intervals, with some gestures, you know, that are there. But with the Russian 8 tones, as it stands today, it's melody oriented. So the Alaskans definitely took that concept, and they have their own. Some of them have their own 8 tones, but it's done in that melody oriented. So it's like a different kind of melody.
Okay, so it's its own sort of Alaskan adaptation of the
of the
Russian melody tones.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So anyway, yep.
Well, hey, that's a lot of fascinating stuff, Elias. You know,
Thank you,
hopefully people that don't know anything about, you know, monasticism or what it's like to be, you know, a monastic novice or asceticism will find a lot of your story interesting. And we got to talk a little bit about some of the musical stuff. Maybe we can have another conversation another time and delve into some more nitpicky stuff about the specifics of Orthodox music, which I'm super interested in. But thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Likewise.
Yeah, talk soon.
All right.